Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to talk about Jesse Edwards, who officially signed a two-way contract with the Timberwolves. He'll be playing at Las Vegas Summer League. We'll also talk a little bit more about Nadir Hifi. We talked briefly about him on Tuesday, but he's maybe the most intriguing non-standard contract roster player for the Wolves in Vegas. We'll revisit a couple names to know here as Summer League kicks off for the Wolves on Friday. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Only 2 days away from the Timberwolves playing in Las Vegas Summer League. Their Summer League camp is ongoing right now. And, yeah, I mean, we're going to have semi-real Wolves basketball here in just a couple of days. So I want to talk more about that today. The Wolves did fill officially their second of 3 two-way contracts. We'll talk about Jesse Edwards and also the intrigue behind Nadir Hifi as well. It's all upcoming on the show today. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So we talked on the show last week, I think it was first reported like the night of the draft. So nearly 2 weeks ago now, that Jesse Edwards, most recently of West Virginia, was going to be signing a two-way deal with Minnesota. It was reported by a lesser-known ESPN reporter, somebody who I think was based in Europe. Jesse Edwards is, of course, he's from Dutch heritage. So I think it was reported over there first. And the team, it wasn't reported by any of the local guys at all until here on Tuesday is when the team announced that Jesse Edwards would be signing a two-way deal with Minnesota. And so we talked a little bit about him kind of in passing in the past because, I saw the rumor, but I didn't see it right away because it was such an inconspicuous report. But now we could talk a little bit more fully about Jesse Edwards. I think he's a really intriguing prospect, and he makes a lot of sense for the Wolves to take a look. He's a center. He's just a shade below 7 feet. He's probably about 7 feet with shoes, and he's got a wingspan of 7'5". He's a 5-year college player, so he's already 24 years old. He played 4 years at Syracuse, and then he finished with West Virginia last year. He was an all Big 12 selection last season, averaged 15 points and 8 rebounds per game. His last year at Syracuse, he averaged 14.5 and 10, and he's also a really strong shot blocker. If I was to just describe who Jesse Edwards was in like a short paragraph, it would be he's an athletic, rim-running big. I think he's going to be a good pick and roll, has the ability to be a good screen setter at the NBA level. I think he's a solid rim protector. For a 24-year-old, the trick is that he's pretty raw. And that said, the athleticism and the size is so good, and some of the natural instincts I think are good enough that he could still be plug and play as just go out there and wreak some havoc and do these 2 or 3 things if you need him to be. But he's nowhere near an actual rotation level NBA player at this point, which is tough for a 24-year-old. But with 3 two-way contracts to play with, it makes sense. Last year, the Wolves filled their two-way deals with, kind of a high floor, low ceiling guy in Luka Garza. They knew what they were getting out of him as a depth piece. Daishen Nix, who theoretically has some upside, but I think everybody kind of knows what he is. He's an inefficient, high volume scorer, big body guard, can shoot it a little bit, but there wasn't a whole lot of development there. And then Jalen Clark, who they knew wasn't going to play last year, they signed him to a 2-year, two-way deal right after the draft last season, and he's still on that two-way deal this year. And I'm very excited to see him play in Summer League. This year, Jalen Clark gets one of them. Jesse Edwards gets another. The Wolves have not relied on that third two-way spot for anybody that they think might they might need during the season. And going back to previous Wolves front offices, whether it be Gerson Rosas or even further to Tibbs, who the two-way contracts became a thing under Tibbs' reign, if you will, they more frequently, even when there were only two-way slots, were more likely to bring in guys who might help them. Now, this is like actually be a rotation piece in a pinch during the season. This is the difference between a team that wasn't very good and a team that is now a conference finals team. But I don't think the Wolves entered last year, even though they didn't know they'd be a conference finals team, that I'm sure they thought they could be a 50-plus win team. They were never planning to use those two-way guys as part of, like, this is our plan for this year, break glass in case of emergency. They were developmental / like true break glass in case of emergency depth pieces, like true 14th guys. That's what Daishen Nix was. He only played one game where he played rotation minutes last year. Luka Garza played less than 10, and the Wolves had injuries to Karl-Anthony Towns and, to a lesser extent, Rudy and Nas. So the way the Wolves are using these two-way deals, there's no world in which they think Jesse Edwards is going to have to contribute this year at the NBA level, and that's fine. He's purely an Iowa Wolves signing. What can he do in the G League? And can he show us enough that we could bring him back next year on a two-way or on a camp deal, or, give him a shot next year with the big club? I don't think he sniffs the court at the NBA level this year, unless it's a purely garbage time, like what they typically have done with some of their G League guys. Is like he'll go down and play for a stretch, and then if they've got a stretch of games where they might need somebody in a pinch or whatever, they'll bring him up and they'll put him on the bench, and they may even leave him inactive, but at least have him travel with the team, get exposed to the NBA game and everything, and NBA practices and shoot-arounds and stuff like that. But he's going to spend the vast majority of the season in the G League because the tools are there for him to be a solid backup big. He's kind of in the same vein in terms of like what he could become, just other kind of bouncy athletic rim runners with maybe a little more size than some of those guys. I mean, you could throw out like again, this is like, he's not these players, but like a Dwight Powell type player. I think he's bigger than Dwight Powell, but that type of a guy where he's got the size, or going back further, like, well, I don't know. It's funny because the way I described him earlier when I talked about him is he reminds me, when you watch him, body type and the way he plays, which is a little, well, athletic. He's not super fluid with some of his movements. It reminds me of Rudy, and he's not quite as big as Rudy. Very few guys are, unless you see him standing next to Wembanyama. But some of the, like, yes, he's athletic, and yes, he's big, but it's not super fluid all the time. But yet around the rim, I think he's got good touch. I think he's got pretty good feel when it comes to his touch around the rim. I think he's a good rim runner because of his size and athleticism. There's certainly some areas technically, especially for somebody who's 24 already, played 5 years of major college basketball. He's not technically sound defensively. He's not technically sound all the time when he sets screens. It's kind of hit and miss. So he could be an offensive foul waiting to happen. The Wolves have plenty of centers who are capable of delivering offensive fouls, setting screens. But I think it's the activity level, the touch around the rim, and also a good shot blocker. Last season, the block rate was down a little bit, but his last 2 years at Syracuse, it was a top 10 block rate in the nation. So, and I think some of that is natural feel and also size and athleticism. There's a lot more to be learned, and spending training camp with Rudy Gobert certainly is going to help with his development. I think the upside's a little bit limited because I mentioned his touch around the rim. He doesn't really have a jumper. Free throw shooting for his career in college was 62%. He was 73% his last year at Syracuse, but on greater volume, he dipped to 52% last year, which is a little concerning. It was actually his worst mark of any year in college was his last year. So the free throw shooting's got to improve a little. Like, you worry that now, obviously Rudy doesn't have a jumper, but Jesse Edwards doesn't have he's not Rudy defensively. He doesn't impact the game in that way. He wasn't the quarterback of the country's best defense last year in college. He doesn't have the same impact as Rudy Gobert does, and no one does. That's why Rudy's a multi-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner. So all I'm saying is there's certainly upside there for him to be a good rotational big who's athletic, who's big, who could block shots, who can set screens, he can rim run, in transition. He can dive to the rim in the half court and be effective as a lob catcher, and as a decent shot blocker. I think that potential is there. And for the Wolves to take a look and have him try and learn from Rudy and be like, hey, can you be, 40% of what Rudy Gobert is? And you're, very different than Luka Garza, right? Luka Garza is a skilled offensive big who's had to work hard to be good enough defensively to stick in the league and good enough as a, mobility wise on offense. This dude, like Jesse Edwards, has mobility, even if it doesn't always look fluid. He's athletic and he's big and he can catch and all this stuff. I think his hands are good enough. So a very different option than Luka Garza, who of course is now on a standard NBA contract and really is the Wolves' fourth big. Jesse Edwards, they're just going to take a look at him in Summer League and training camp in the G League and see what they have. And I like it. I think that there is the floor is probably fairly low, but the ceiling may only be a backup big because of his age in part and some of the natural instincts that just aren't there even after 5 years of college. But there's a really reasonable path. Like, I think he's one of those guys that the odds of him reaching that ceiling are actually pretty decent. But the Wolves will get a pretty good idea fairly quickly. We'll see how he looks in Summer League. All right. I want to talk about Nadir Hifi next, and then we'll get into some of the other guys on the Summer League roster. That's all upcoming. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And while MLB, besides WNBA, it's really the only major sport ongoing right now, you can get tickets on Game Time for anything. Last minute deals, saving up to 60% off buying last minute for not just sports, but also comedy, concerts, theater. I go to all of the above. My wife and I like to go to really any sort of live entertainment, and Game Time's the best way to do it. You can get flash deals with even more exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. You could also get a panoramic view from your seat in their app before you buy. They have a lowest price guarantee. Well, they'll credit you 110% of the difference if you find what you think might be a better price somewhere else. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to MLB or anything else with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Frank, I waited too long on Tuesday's show to talk about Nadir Hifi. I thought I was going to have more time. I talked for too long about some of the other guys, but Hifi's the player that he's the non-roster, if you will, player that I'm most excited to watch in Las Vegas Summer League starting this Friday. I mean, of course, you've got the rookies, Dillingham, Terrence Shannon. I'm very excited to watch those guys, and maybe equally as excited to watch Leonard Miller play. We saw very little of him, and there's, there's a lot of potential there with Leonard Miller. Josh Minot, who of course we've seen now like his third Summer League. I'm excited to watch him. And then of course, Jalen Clark, last year's second round pick, who could have been a lottery pick if he hadn't torn his Achilles. Excited to see him back on the floor. So that's five guys right there. But if I was going to pick somebody outside of those five to really keep an eye on, it'd be Nadir Hifi. And it's always frustrating going into Summer League because you don't know how much, like, there's been guys in the past I've been excited about, and then they don't actually give him much run at all. And then we just never know. And obviously there's a reason for it. Maybe they didn't earn it based on Summer League training camp or whatever. But Nadir Hifi is really interesting. He turns 22 later in July, and he's small. He's a guard. He's only about 6'2", and there's not a whole lot of info on him out there. There's a lot of highlights and stuff like that. But I found like a year ago he measured in at like 6'1", and I found he was listed this year in various places at 6'2", 6'3", But a year ago, his wingspan was only 6 feet, according to this website that I found. So say he's 6'2" now with a 6'1", 6'2" wingspan. He doesn't have a great wingspan either. It might be negative. It might be, about equal there, which is generally like Desmond Bane is like the last guy I remember. And Desmond Bane fell to the last pick of the first pick of the second round, basically because of his wingspan. Turns out he's a really good NBA player. So it's not the end all be all, but it's very rare you have an NBA player who doesn't have a positive wingspan. And Hifi's right on that line. He's not quite 22. He's had a couple of breakout seasons in France, and he actually was just cut from Team France. I mentioned this on Tuesday's show. So that's, and I don't know, like chicken or the egg here. Well, that's maybe not the right analogy. But he was cut from Team France and immediately signed with the Wolves for Summer League. I don't know if like they worked that out for some reason. I mean, it's just a Summer League deal. Like they haven't offered him a two-way as far as we know. Like there's nothing concrete here, but I think that's interesting because I don't know. Like I know Team France has a bunch of older guys, led by Rudy and Wembanyama, but Hifi's really talented, and I'm surprised that he's not on Team France. He was just cut from Team France. Last year, he played for in Euro Cup in 18 total games in Euro Cup last season. He averaged 17 points, just under 3 assists and 2 rebounds, 1 steal per game. He shot 49% from the field, 39% from 3. And then he played 34 games in the Pro A League in France, and he averaged 16 points per game, 2 assists. He shot 38% for 3, 46% from the floor. So not quite as good in a bigger sample there. But again, we're talking about a guy who was 22 at the time, playing in this pro league without great size. And what stands out to me when watching his highlights is he could get his shot off from literally anywhere on the floor. The range is not quite unlimited, but especially in the mid-range, he gets his shot off and it goes in a fair amount of the time. And it's funny because he reminds me a lot of playing style-wise, and it's more twos, less threes, but a little bit of Daishen Nix. He's not as big as Daishen Nix, to be clear. And at this stage, I don't know that he's much better of a passer. There are good passing highlights of him. I haven't seen enough of him to really know what his full feel is like. Some of the different scouting reports I found are basically he's not a natural playmaker. He's more of a natural scorer, and he's had to learn to be a playmaker because of the role he's been asked to play, and also, frankly, because of his size. The one thing I do like is he always plays hard on both ends of the floor. From everything I've seen, I think he's an okay defender for his size, but he plays hard, and that's what you're going to have to do undersized at the NBA level is fight through screens, get into guys' jerseys, and just be aggressive. Now, he has had some foul trouble, which is going to be an issue stateside if he does make it into the league, because that learning curve can be challenging for guys. It's just a little bit less physical, or there's less physicality allowed, especially in the perimeter, and he needs to be physical given his size. So the good thing is he plays hard and wants to be physical. The bad thing is he's probably going to foul too much. I think he can play off the ball despite how small he is. And I know I say all of this, and he's basically the same size, shorter wingspan and maybe slightly shorter than Rob Dillingham. He's certainly bigger. He's got a bigger frame than Dillingham, similar to a Daishen Nix. He's built out a bit more. So, the difference, though, is Dillingham is like a legit 40+% three-point shooter, was like 50% almost on catch and shoot threes. And Hifi's not there. It doesn't mean he won't be. And he naturally is a good shooter. And we talked already about his shooting splits. I didn't mention his free throw shooting, but he's 85% as a pro in 112 games in Europe, going back 4 years. So going back to when he was like 17, he's nearly 85% on free throw percentage. So the touch is there from everywhere on the floor. I think he's, fine in the pick and roll. Again, not a natural playmaker for others, but he seems to have good instincts there. Exudes confidence. Very confident player. Wants the ball in his hands. Wants to take the shot. Again, a lot like Daishen Nix in that regard. It wouldn't shock me if he ends up with the Daishen Nix two-way contract. And I have no idea if Hifi would do that or if he would rather play in Europe and probably make more money as a 22-year-old in Europe than as a two-way player in the NBA/G League. But I think putting him in that developmental role in the Daishen Nix type position where, could he develop into somebody who we would trust to run this team in a pinch, say Conley's hurt and, Dillingham, we need a backup or whatever. Like, could you trust Hifi? Like this year, probably not. But is there a world in which the Wolves say, you know what? He can have this two-way deal. We'll give him a shot. I do think there's legit upside here. I think he's got like 6-man to starter caliber upside. The size limits it a bit, but if he's just a natural born scorer and he's got the handles to do it, I haven't even mentioned that, but I think he's really impressive with the ball in his hands, handle wise, shooting wise, gets a shot off anywhere. He's athletic enough, I think. But again, like shooting inconsistency, size are the biggest things, and also needing to develop some of the playmaking chops. Very intriguing though. And Summer League's an area where he could, if he gets the opportunity, and I don't know how much, like they don't have a ton of point guards on this roster. Dillingham. Well, I guess it's Dillingham, him, and Daisha Nix, I guess would be the three. Oh, and James Bishop the fourth. We'll talk more about him here in a minute. I'd love to see Hifi get some run. I'm skeptical they're going to give him enough. I shouldn't say that. Give him as much as I want them to because I want to watch him play. But he'll be a fun name to watch. So keep an eye on Nadir Hifi as just a fun player on the Summer League roster here in Vegas. All right. I'm going to breeze through a couple other names that I kind of breezed through on Tuesday, but I feel like I need to spend a little bit more time. I think just, again, names to know as we head into Summer League, and then I'll set up here what we're doing the rest of the week on the show. All that's upcoming here next. All right. So Timberwolves roster guys, Dillingham, Terrence Shannon Jr., Leonard Miller, Josh Minott, Jalen Clark. Iowa Wolves guys, I'm not going to spend any time on them today, but Daisha Nix, of course, two-way last year. Gabe Kalsher, former Gopher in Iowa State, was with the Iowa Wolves for part of last season. Javante Cook, who's been on the Summer League team, I think 2 years in a row, was on the Iowa Wolves, and the Wolves had him in camp last year as a Exhibit 10 guy. So he was on the training camp roster. I double-checked that. I said on Tuesday I thought he was. He was. So he's back. Nigel Eastern and Kokiat, who both played for the Iowa Wolves, or Kokiat was on the team last year in Summer League 2 and didn't really get to play. I mentioned him Tuesday, intrigued by Yacht. I'd love to see him play a little bit. I think he got into 3 Summer League games barely last summer. We talked about Jesse Edwards, two-way guy. We talked about Hifi. The others to know, Joe Wieskamp, former Iowa, former Spur, there's one other team he played for. I don't know. He's 6'6" shooting guard, needs to shoot the ball better as a pro than he has so far. I'm not going to spend much time on him today. Tyler Wall, I talked about him a little bit on Tuesday. He's a Minnesota native, 5 years at Wisconsin, was hurt his second to last year at Wisconsin, but his junior and then his second senior year was very good, especially defensively. I think he's got good feel offensively. He doesn't have range. He's a true, like a old school big power forward where he can score in the post, has a good knack for the ball, good rebounder, really good defender. I don't think he's really a two-way guy. I think I said this on Tuesday. I think he's more of a Exhibit 10, like maybe he gets a shot in training camp, but I think he fits as just a G League guy. Like, I think he's got a future in pro basketball. I think it's probably more overseas or in the G League. I don't see the Wolves giving him a legit shot. I don't think he's a training camp guy. Who I do think could be an Exhibit 10 guy to give them some more size, some more bigs for competition in training camp, because that's important. You can add, they have like 4 or 5 spots to add guys to training camp deals. Jaden Ledee, excuse me. I was saying his name wrong on Tuesday. It's Ledee, Jaden Ledee. I like him a lot. He's also a 5-year player and played at San Diego State. He scored a ton last year, and this is what we talked about on Tuesday's show, is he scored a ton and did a lot of it based on his knack for the ball, offensive rebounding, and also post moves. He played 1 year at Ohio State, 2 years at TCU, and 2 years at San Diego State. Never started more than 2 games in a season until last year, his 5th year. He's going to be 25 years old. However, he's in some ways, I don't want to say the opposite of Jesse Edwards, but while he's a 5-year guy, I don't think he's a very raw prospect. I think he kind of is what he is because he's already skilled at the post. He already has a nose for the ball. He's undersized. He's 6'9". He's got a nice wingspan. Let's see. I thought I had it in front of me. Now I lost it. But he's got a good wingspan. And I think his ability to get to the basketball, again, nose for the ball, undersized power forward, plays hard. The Wolves don't have a ton of that. They got a little bit of it in Luka Garza and maybe Josh Minott if he gets some run, but they don't have a lot of that, like, the do stuff mentality, which is one of the reasons why I've been harping on Josh Minott every chance I get the last couple of years. And I really hope he shows something in Summer League because he's got a shot at being that 10th man and earning a role with the big club this year. Ladie has some of that stick-to-itiveness that Luka. Now he's not as big as Luka because Garza's 6'10", 6'11". Ladie is 6'9", maybe, but he's strong. He's big. He's built out. Good frame. Rebounds the basketball, and I think that physicality will go a long way at the pro level. I think he's a classic G League type guy and could be very, very good in the G League. I don't think, like, if he was a little taller, if he was a couple inches taller, like Luka Garza's height or bigger, he would have a real shot at a two-way right away. I don't think he's there. I think he's going to have to play in the G League, but he could be an Exhibit 10 guy who the Wolves give some preference to. Again, basically what that means is it's like a preferred walk-on in college where you come to training camp, you get a bonus usually for signing. And then if you stay with the team for, I think it's 60 days or something, that's 30 or 60 days after training camp with the Iowa Wolves, you get like another 80 grand bonus or something like that. So you get paid more than the other guys in the G League to stay with that team's G League team. They get to have you in training camp. You get to be on the preseason roster, etc. I think there's enough there as a plug and play. Hey, can you give us energy for 4 minutes? I think Ladie can do that. And I think if he gets the ball in his hands in the low block against a guy who's his size or smaller, he's going to score at the NBA level. The jumper is weird. It's like a shot put kind of. And he never shot threes until his last year at San Diego State. Like literally, he shot total in his career over 4 seasons, Ohio State, TCU, San Diego State. He had attempted 16 threes through the first 4 seasons. He shot 45 last year and he made 20 of them. That's 44.5%. So it's a shot put three. He's probably not going to be asked to ever shoot it at the NBA level, but theoretically there's some upside there. Free throw wise, he was over 70%. The touch is good. Again, good in the paint, good with the low block moves. So I like Jaden Ladie again there's no real upside here. Frankly, this is a purely depth play, but I will always want a guy he has good size. He's undersized for a true NBA power forward, but he's not tiny. He's not 6'6". He's 6'9", and he's big. So I will always advocate for guys like that who have a nose for the ball and can rebound. The upside is limited. The ceiling is very limited. But can the activity level and the touch around the rim and some of those Luka Garza-esque, minus the three-pointer and minus a little bit of size, plus some athleticism, can that type of player stick at the NBA level? I think as a two-way guy, he's got a shot. I don't know that the Wolves I don't think they'll use a two-way on him this year, especially after signing Jesse Edwards to a two-way. But I think as an Exhibit 10 training camp invite, Iowa Wolves type player, Jaden Ladie is interesting. And he'd be another one to look for if he gets some run here in Summer League. So I'm flagging Nadir Hifi. I'm flagging Jaden Ladie as guys to watch. James Bishop IV is another name, a high volume scorer. We talked about him Tuesday. I think he's a less efficient Rob Dillingham, a smaller Dacian Nix, somewhere in that high volume, low efficiency, spotty at best shooter, undersized to be a good defender point guard role where he can go get you a bucket. But now, given the depth that the Wolves have at guard with Dillingham, and which is a weird thing to say, but between Dillingham and frankly, Hifi, I think is more intriguing than Bishop. I don't think there's really any question about that. And even Dacian Nix, I don't know how much run Bishop actually gets, but he's a name who did a lot in college, another 5-year, I believe, college player. So spent, I think, his whole career at George Washington. So names to pay attention to, but I'm flagging Hifi, I'm flagging Ladie as non-roster guys to watch. More intriguing to me than any of the ones from Iowa than, Cook, Kalsher, Nix, Eastern, or Yacht. I think those guys are going to be the most interesting to watch. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. Of course, we'll be back on Thursday. I'm going to have a conversation with Sonny, the host of Locked On Illini. We're going to talk about Terrence Shannon Jr. I'm going to do a segment for his show talking about Shannon's role with the Wolves. He's going to talk about what Shannon brought to the Illini last year. So we'll run that on Thursday. And then Friday, we'll set you up with specifically what to watch for before Friday afternoon's 4 p.m. Central tip when the Wolves kick off in Vegas for Summer League. So lots to get to here this week. And next week will be a ton of Summer League as that will be ongoing throughout next week. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon at Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.